today on. This is a 1-hour webinar presented by Paul Howe, Vice President of Sales here at Allen Interactions, on your e-learning investment, how Allen Interactions achieves business impact and boosts learner performance. Thank you so much, everyone, for taking time out of your busy schedules to learn more about our approach and beliefs in achieving business impact and improving performance in learners. We think and hope you will find this to be a valuable hour spent with us. Again, I'm Carrie Zenz, and Brittany Lager is also here with us, and she will be providing support through the questions pane, answering any technical issues that you have today. We truly hope that you don't, but technology can always, throw us for a loop sometimes. So any questions you have or issues, please send them through the questions pane. And this is your control panel. The questions pane is right here that I'm talking about. There's two ways to listen to this session today via audio, either through your telephone, your landline. The information is there if you check on the radio button, or through the mic and speakers of your computer. And then this here is your grab tab, and you can collapse or expand your control panel on your screen by clicking on the orange arrow. And Paul may be using the hands feature today to have you raise your hand if he asks a question and then wants to make sure that everybody has completed whatever it is he's asked. So he may ask you to use that feature as well. Today's session is being recorded, and we will be distributing a link to the recording along with slides shortly following today's session. And we encourage you to share your thoughts and comments by using the hashtag #CustomElearning. Now just a little bit about Paul, and I'll turn things over to Paul. Paul Howe has been in the learning industry for 20 years. As the 6th employee of Allen Interactions, an expert instructional designer and authorware developer, Paul has excelled in many roles, holding executive-level positions in both sales and operations here at Allen. Since 1993, Paul has provided strategic learning and consulting services for more than 200 major organizations. As I said earlier, he currently is the Vice President of Sales here at Allen, and he holds a Bachelor of Science degree from St. John's University and has a vast array of speaking experience. In his free time, he truly loves the outdoors, camping, hunting, and fishing. And now I'm going to turn things over to Paul.
Thank you, Carrie, and welcome everybody. Appreciate you spending an hour with us today. We're going to focus a lot on tactical design decisions to be made to make sure that your learners are performing and that provides impact to the business, but we'll also be talking at a strategic level as well. We're going to focus most of our conversation today on a model that we use to make sure that our learners are engaged and in fact retain and are able to apply what we've taught them on the job, thereby providing impact to the business. Before we get started, I did want to just get a poll to see the types of people we have on the webinar. Again, we want to address all audiences, and we'll be at a strategic level and a tactical level, but just want to get a feel for the folks that we have out there. I'm going to launch a quick poll, and if you could spend a minute and answer the question on what your role is, it would be very helpful. Okay, we've got most of the folks that have replied, so I'm going to actually close this and show the results here. And as expected, we have a mixed bag. It looks like we have the majority are actual designers and developers developing projects, so that's good. We'll address most of the presentation for that audience, but again, we will be talking at a higher level, strategic level, for some of the other audience members we have here. Okay, but before we get started, we're going to do something a little bit new, and we're going to provide a challenge. Hopefully I'm interesting enough where you don't multitask, but we realize people do multitasks when listening to webinars. And so we're going to actually give you a multitask item. And what we're going to do is give you a challenge and present some content and a a hypothetical learning situation and ask you to think about how you might actually treat this. Now, it's not extensive content reading by any means, but hopefully get the thought process going on how you might actually treat this particular business need, and take a look at the content that we'll provide and maybe sketch out some ideas on how you might actually treat it. And after we get partway through the presentation, we're going to come back and take a look at a prototype of a potential design and see how well that matches up with what you were thinking. Brittany has actually put in the chat window a link to a PDF document that will give you additional information beyond what's on the screen right now. But essentially, you're a learning member of a department of the food service program or institute, and you've been asked to develop a course that's going to teach the food service workers how to serve food to our students in the schools such that the food that's served will be reimbursable. And again, I don't want to spend too much time on this because we provided that document for you to download. But in the background, if you can think about some ideas you might have on that, we'll come back and revisit this later. So moving forward, we do want to talk about different types of learning design, and we realize that we maybe have oversimplified this, but we're going to talk about 3 different bands today. And if we talk at the level from the information awareness, where we're just actually presenting information at a knowledge-based level, all the way to performance and behavior change, where we're expecting what it is that we've taught to be applied in the field, and we're changing behavior or making sure that behavior is actually happening. So starting with the information awareness band, what we're talking about here is knowledge-based content. We're presenting information. We don't really care whether they actually retain it or remember. We might be interested in that they know where to go to get help once they encounter that situation, but we're not interested in application. We're just interested in getting the word out, essentially. Those types of solutions tend to focus on our ROI cost savings, maybe from an instructor-led venue. They focus on speed of delivery. And many times the word rapid authoring may be associated with that, where we're using templates to quickly get information out to our learner base. Now, an example of that, we'll create a contextual situation for you here. Let's say we wanted to train truck drivers across the country on how to actually manage railroad crossings as they're driving their vehicles across the country. We know there's a lot of different accidents, a lot of deaths associated with railroad accidents, and so this is a very mission critical thing. But if treated at an awareness level, where we're just going to get information out there, a solution might look like this. We may have a main menu, maybe we have a pre-test and a post-test, but at some point they would click and go into different railroad crossings, and I'm going to go into this one on the top left. And as I do, I come across some additional content. This is essentially what you do and what you don't do at a railroad crossing. Heavy text-based, so granted we've stripped out maybe prettier graphics, and we would want maybe more pages, less text. But essentially at an awareness level, we would present information. From there, we might actually go to a knowledge check. Maybe we've presented 3, 4, 5 screens of content. We go to a knowledge check. Maybe it's a simple multiple choice question like I have up here now. When approaching this railroad crossing, which is not one of the 6 steps you would do. Maybe we have another knowledge check where you're actually identifying the different types of crossing signs and what those mean. And what we would argue is that there may be a time and a place for this, so this is a little bit of an overstatement. Don't let this happen to you. But if in fact you have mission critical business impactful type initiatives, this is probably not going to get you as far as you could get. And we're going to take a look at a model that can get you there. So again, I don't want to say don't ever let this happen, because if we actually do just want to get information out there, this may be very, very appropriate. But in this type of situation, we know deaths are happening, and we want to prevent those deaths. So let's actually move to the skill building and application bands and performance and behavior change. So for these types of solutions, we want to look at action-based. We want to make sure that our ROI is measured on the performance, not just the fact that we reduce cost. Not just the fact that we just got something out and checked the compliance box, but in fact we're actually creating business impact. And to do that, we're going to start broaching on task simulation and practice of what one's job is. We also need to make sure we're aligned to the business as well, and we'll talk about that at a strategic level. So how can we take this same content and realize that maybe we're not getting the biggest bang for the buck at an awareness level, and develop something that would be more engaging and more apt to have our learners performing on the job when in fact they get to those railroad crossings. Now it's likely that it's more than just a single learning event, and it should be more than a single learning event, but within that single learning event, let's look at a solution that would actually get the learners more engaged. So I'm hopping over to the application, and now here's an application where I can actually select which vehicle I want to drive, and as I select that vehicle, I'm now going to actually start a road trip across the country, in which case I'm going to encounter 3 different railroad crossings. I'll take a second to catch up. Now I'm actually in my vehicle. I'm driving. I can speed up or slow down by clicking on the speedometer. I can turn the radio on, turn it off. If the phone rings, I can answer it. As I approach this crossing, I got to figure out what I'm going to do based on what truck I'm driving, the length of the bed, the type of crossing it is. Ultimately, I'm going to need to stop the vehicle. So I'm going to stop the vehicle. And there may be some crossings where I need to look left and right. I'm actually looking left. I'm going to click and look right. I may need to roll down the window because maybe my view is blocked. I should listen to see if I hear anything. So all the different things I would actually do on my job to make a decision when to cross, I will be able to do. I'm going to move forward for this particular crossing, and I did it successfully. The crossings will get increasingly difficult as you move forward.
You've completed this crossing. Your trip continues.
So we'll go through this full application. This is something that is actually up on our website. And we'll back to our presentation. I want to do another goal. Stretches up. If you were to look at that, we're going to talk a little bit further, but at a very high level description I just gave, very brief description I just gave, where would you place most of the training solutions that your organization is involved with? Is it all awareness level? Is it mostly awareness with some skill performance where you're at a higher level simulation where users are actually practicing what they're doing on their job? Or are most of the solutions you're developing to that level? So we got up to 80% have answered, so I'm going to close the poll now. I'll show you the result. And we have a mix. Again, there's no right or wrong answers here because there may be appropriate levels of learning that are be designed per the business objectives, but we got some that are developing all awareness, some with a mix, and some that are actually most of what they're developing is skill or performance level learning. Now, let's take a look at a strategic level. We often hear in the industry, hey, that's great. We believe in developing solutions along that level that you showed, and we'll show some more here in the presentation. But we're faced with thousands of hours of learning. Our organization has hundreds of hours of compliance and leadership and all this other types of learning, and we have limited budgets with to do it, limited resources with which to deal with, and so we need to make some decisions. And often we hear those decisions are, let's actually create everything at an information awareness level because we can quickly get content out to the masses, and maybe we're not even measuring or the impact to the business, so it's okay because we're getting our applications out, we've checked the box, the solution's out there, and we're actually get high reviews because we've actually done that. We would argue, taking a little different look at this, and it may be that as you do analysis and align with the business objectives, catch the slide to catch up here, that you might identify some things that would actually move the bar for the business quite a bit. Maybe it would increase sales by X%, or reduce waste in the manufacturing plant, or reduce injuries. And for those items, if we do a level of learning where we can ensure or be more apt to ensure that our learners are actually performing, that is going to return money to our business, either in dollars increased or dollars saved. And in doing so, you might reevaluate some of the other solutions and say, well, since we're just at an awareness level, it really isn't that important that they need to know this or retain it. Maybe we can get by with sending out a PDF or an email blast. So that investment, here we are implying that maybe it's additional money. It doesn't always have to be additional money or resources to get to those levels, but sometimes it is, quite admittedly. But if it is, that can actually return more money to the business, and that money can be used to increase training budgets and or feed more money into the business. So you may then again reevaluate, well, maybe there's something that's going to provide us a huge return. If we increase our sales by 3%, maybe that's $1 billion to our business. Well, for something like that, we should pay very close attention to what we're delivering and deliver at a level to make sure that our learners are engaged. And if we're successful, again, as I mentioned, those dollars can get funneled back in, and it becomes easier for training departments to actually ask for bigger budgets if those returns are showed to upper management. Now, what is a model that I showed earlier? How would we use that model to make sure our learners are engaged, to make sure our learners are practicing what it is that we expect of them? And this is a model, again, in a short period of time here, we could talk for a long time on design, but we're going to break it down to a model that could be very useful. It's a model that we use in our business as we look at training solutions we develop. It's called Context Challenge Activity Feedback, CCAF. And it's a filter that we'll use analyzing a business objective, and if the business objective can lead to big impact, then this is something we're going to actually want to build into our designs. I apologize for a minute here. Our screen seems to be locked up. There we go. So the model I just talked about, context challenge activity feedback. Now, context. Let's break down each of these components. Context. Let's put the learner into the world that they live. Create something meaningful to them so they actually see the value of it, versus just presenting content that the corporation says this is what you need to know. So less effective context would be something that's generic in nature. Maybe we're just presenting parts of a process, but we don't actually show them how they would use that process in their job. Maybe it's an academic knowledge base, as we talked earlier. A better context would be something specific and it's related to what they do in their job. They see the benefit of it. That can be done through stories. That can be done through a simulation like we showed with the truck driver example. But we're going to tap into their personal emotions in order to create that context. Challenge, then, the challenge part of our model is, having created that context, let's put them into a challenge where they in fact have to do what they have to do in their job. You saw how we did that with the truck driver. Well, they drive trucks. Let's put them in a truck, have them drive trucks. They cross crossings, and those crossings are dangerous. Well, let's have them practice crossing those crossings. So a less effective challenge might be one where you're just simply giving somebody a score. Maybe it's a compliance item. It would be a challenge that's too easy. I tend to use a click-through test. If I can sit there and look at my screen and click without reading anything and without maybe even looking at my screen to get through it, then it's likely that the learners might actually be doing that as well. So it's not a very effective challenge for those learners. A better challenge would be one that has purpose. It is progressively difficult. Maybe it's even difficult out of the chute. It's associated with real life, again, like I said, with what's on their job, and it may be a multi-step where we're going to actually let them go down different paths. All of these things that I'm talking about we'll show some examples of shortly. The activity then would be what they need to do to actually complete that challenge. Maybe they need to actually speak in a sales conversation. Maybe they need to actually answer a series of questions that's going to take them down different branches. So the less effective actions are going to be ones that are rooted in mechanics. Maybe we have them navigate around a 3D world, but the reality is all they're doing is navigating. That's not associated with what their job is. It may provide some learner engagement, but we really got to make sure that we're having them perform actions that are related to their jobs. Again, as I mentioned, a less effective action would be one that is accomplished without thought. Better actions would be ones that's going to require some sort of effort, make the user actually use their brain and think about what they're doing to make their selections. It's going to allow for self-correction. As we talk about feedback in the next part of the model, you'll see what we mean there. So feedback, what do I mean by that? Well, based on those actions they take in the activity to try to solve the challenge we've presented, we're going to provide feedback. Less effective feedback would be feedback where we just give maybe a, hey Johnny, you got it wrong, try again. It's just generic. I don't know if everybody's ever struggled with a solution where you're trying to come up with different ways to say, no, you got it wrong. If that's the case, you might want to look at it because maybe there's a way to actually provide more engagement to the learner by delaying feedback and not providing it right away. Let them figure out the mistakes they've made and go back and self-correct, and or let them go down a path where you show them the real-life consequences of their actions. So we call this instructional interactivity. Context, challenge, activity, feedback. Let's create a framework and conditions that are similar to what a person's job is. Create that context. Then we're going to create a stimulus for them to act within that context. That's our challenge. The physical response to that challenge is going to be what's the interactivity that we've built to have them solve that challenge. And the feedback then should be a reflection of the effectiveness of what they've done. So let's take a look at some content built two different ways. One I would categorize in that awareness level band that we talked about earlier, and the other would be more along the lines of the context, challenge, activity, feedback that we just discussed. The content involves fraud activity within banks. Now there's a lot of different types of fraud and criminals out there. We're going to address just one component of it, which would be check fraud. So the negotiability of a check. So I've launched a solution here, and a typical traditional type of solution might be that we're going to list some course objectives. We're going to give the user a pre-test that they would go through. We're going to then actually get into some content, so I'm going to go into negotiable instruments, and we talk about the different types of things that are negotiable, checks, drafts, warrants. We're going to give some information about the parts of the check. So I can click on the maker, the ABA number, check number. Now you notice here I really don't know how or why I'm getting this information at this point, but I am getting information. Transit routing number, account number, and then I could actually get to the requirements of the negotiability, which breaks that down and narrows it. And there's really only 6 things that I would be interested in determining whether this check is negotiable or not. The date, the amount, and again I can click to read content on that. Then maybe within that I would get a knowledge check immediately thereafter, in which we're going to assess and see if anybody learned anything. But I would caution the audience that we've done some research that if you test folks immediately after some content, the differences between that and what you would actually get if you tested them maybe a week or 2 weeks out will be drastically different. So don't bank too heavily on this data. So that should probably resonate with some folks that have taken e-learning that is more presentation or awareness based. Now since fraud is a huge issue for banks and it does cost them millions and millions of dollars when those things are actually not caught, it's a big deal. And so how can we address that to make sure that we're actually saving the bank's money, or be more apt that our learners are actually able to catch that? Take a look at another example. More in line with the CCAF model we just talked about. So we get a little bit of information up front on why this might be important. And we're going to go into an interaction that is very similar, but there's a subtle difference. we're going to take a look at the parts of the check. Now, what we haven't done is shown you every single piece of the check because it doesn't apply to negotiability. It doesn't relate. There's no reason for you to learn that at this point. And what we're doing is we're actually introducing an order. We want to get the bank tellers used to habitually just looking at a check and going in this order and quickly determining whether it's negotiable or not. So we're going to have them start with the date. We're going to have them go to the dollar amount. And here again is some content that they can read. Many learners may not, but we're going to actually have an interaction where that'll be caught. The maker signature, the drawee bank, the payee, and then the actual endorsement. And so we have a real live looking check. We're going to continue to the next phase where now, since we've introduced that order, we want you to actually remember what that order is. So we need to figure out, okay, what is the first item we should be looking at on the check? It's just a little additional practice. It's the date. Then I should go to the dollar amount. Then I should go to the maker, the drawee bank, the payee, and signature. Okay? Not too dissimilar to what I showed you earlier, but a little bit of subtle difference. But now we're going to move into something where we're actually going to create context for the learner and have them practice. So what we have now is the context is you're a teller, you're at a bank, you're at the teller line, and you have a check that's come in, and you need to determine whether it's negotiable or not. Now you notice on the right-hand side of the screen there's some other items that are available to you. Those are other activities that I could use in other modules to address and determine whether there's fraudulent activity going on. Maybe there's some time where I actually have to swipe the check. So this will become a full-blown SIM. But for check negotiability, we're just asking you, is this check negotiable or not? And this particular one is not. But you're not done there. You then need to determine what part of that check is not. And hopefully you've got to the point where you can quickly now look at the date, dollar amount, pay, drawee bank, and say, okay, well, this is missing. My drawee bank is missing. And we're going to get some random checks given to us. They're checks with, and you'll see here that's actually August 22nd, so we've created it to make it look like it is today. And you would go through this exercise. Ultimately, then we're going to give you a test where you would get rapid fire drill and practice. And we're not going to have you identify where the error is. You just need to identify if it is negotiable or not. And you'll need to pass this test at a passing score. Otherwise, we'll give you another set of random checks to actually go through. So as we look at that, related back, context we created, you're a teller. Challenge, you're going to have a bunch of fraudulent activities, and eventually you have a full-blown SIM where there's customers walking up to you with multiple transactions. The activities are you need to figure out whether those transactions are valid or not. Sometimes it could be just looking at something. Sometimes you might have to ask the customer for their ID. And the feedback will be what the consequences are of those actions. In the feedback where we just took that interaction, you're just getting whether you got those things right or wrong, and then given the ability to practice additionally. So what are some questions you can ask as you're actually working with SMEs, business stakeholders within your organization? Often SMEs will come into the conversation with when you learn to know all this. And while you do need to know, it really is important to the learner now. Make sure my screen is catching up here. What are the decision points? So when a person is doing, what are the decisions they need to make while they do that? And that can become part of your interactivity. And what are the data points needed to make those decisions? Maybe sometimes they need to ask a coworker. Maybe sometimes they need to look something up in resources. But build those into the interactions as part of the activity. And then what are the consequences of good and bad decisions? So it'd be good in the learning if you can show them the real consequences of their actions. And it might be built into a scoring metric, or it might be built into the feedback. We'll take a look at another example. And the context for this is for shoe retailers. Imagine when you and I walk into a mall and we're looking for a size 9 shoe and we're told it doesn't exist. We're likely to actually leave and go buy that in another store. Now, they may be good at customer service and call another one of their stores and find it for us, but we may not be willing to wait, and we'll go buy that shoe somewhere else, which translates into lost revenue for retailers. So it's important that the workers in the stock room and out on the sales floor know how to actually stock the shelves and notice if things are out of place and restock them. Seems like a simple thing. Could be presented with some awareness level content, just with some screens. Here's how you look at the stocks, their shelves. Here's where the boxes go, and maybe a quick knowledge check. Since it is big business, we want to make sure the learners are practicing to the point where they're almost able to walk by and at a glance look at those shelves and make a change. So in this particular interaction, I'm going to launch. For the sake of time, I'm not going to complete this entire interaction, but in this interaction, there's 3 different levels. First level is you have to identify errors. Second level is there's a conveyor belt of boxes that come out. You need to actually properly place things as that conveyor belt comes quicker and quicker. And what we're teaching is a snake ladder view. You need to look from the top left, down, then back up, to the middle, down, and then back up. And as I do that, I notice, and it maybe not as always color, but it surely is going to be the SKU number and the size. I see it out of place here by SKU number, 267822. And if I do my scan and look down to the bottom middle, it looks like that's where that belongs. But in order for me to fit that, I want to get the people used to not just stacking it on top of the 8 because somebody might not look there. We really need to put it back in the right spot. So to do that, I'm going to move my 7.5. Then I can click on my 6.5 and go grab that and move it under my 7. So you go through, there's actually 5 different errors in here you'd need to find. And again, for the sake of time, I'm going to hop back to the presentation. Then after you've completed and found those 5 errors, you would then get the interaction that I alluded to earlier where you have a conveyor belt and the boxes are coming quicker and quicker and you need to figure out where those will actually go. So with that and the ground we've covered so far, I want to revisit the challenge I presented. And hopefully a few at least have multitasked. But remember the challenge was that you're a food service, a learning provider for the Food Service Management Institute, and you now need to actually help the food service workers to serve meals up to the students according to some federal guidelines to ensure that they're actually reimbursable. So we want to reduce the waste in the schools. For the sake of this challenge, we'll say that it's millions and millions and millions of. So do we want to just present information to them with some knowledge checks, or do we want to build something that's more along the lines of the context challenge activity feedback model? So think about what you came up with in your mind, and we're going to take a look at an example or a prototype of a potential treatment in which some of the components of context challenge activity feedback were employed. So now there should be an application up on the screen, offer versus serve. Got some very illustrated characters, but at the core of this interaction, we're going to actually take a look at different menu planning, and let's put them in their world, right? They're a food service provider. So the context would be is you're going to serve breakfast or lunch. You can take a look at the guidelines. We're not going to spend a lot of time presenting them. It's something you can go look at as a learner. Okay, so I can look at those guidelines, and these were part of that PDF that you downloaded if you did. So we can see what the different food components are, and we can page through these guidelines. But ultimately, we need to practice, and so we're going to go into breakfast, and we have a full menu here, Monday through Friday. We can practice any number of these days. So I'm going to go into Monday, and now we're going to view a series of trays. So if I click Continue, I have a bunch of students that are coming up to me. They've selected a few items. It's up to me to now determine whether that's reimbursable or not, and if it's not, to suggest another food item to that child. Now, what's not in this interaction is that actual communication. That might be a nice add, but for the sake of this conversation, it's identification whether it's reimbursable or not. This particular one let's say it is reimbursable. It is in fact not. So we're going to have you practice identifying where these food items fit and where the gaps might be. So toast is obviously a grain or a bread. Click on juice. And the juice then is obviously a vegetable or fruit. Okay, so that only counts as 2 food items. I get some feedback. It's not reimbursable. So how can we make this actually reimbursable? So I'm going to actually offer up a sausage biscuit. And now we haven't turned that, in fact, turned that into a reimbursable meal. So this drill and practice would continue, and things that you got wrong would actually come back to have you try them again. The context is you're a server. You need to serve people. The activity and challenges, you need to actually create these meals for these students. And the feedback would come in the form of the feedback that we saw here, whether it's reimbursable or not. And we might also extend that to be showing the consequence. Since I did say it was millions of dollars, we might show the real life consequence if they're able to do this properly or improperly. Now, having looked at that at a very, very high level, it's a model that we use in our organization, but within that, there's many, many different design considerations you can make as you're building your challenges and activities. And we wanted to have you walk away with a few things or myths or traps to watch out for as you do that. My screen, wait to get my screen to catch up here. Okay. First myth we want to address is many folks follow a process by which, or belief that you need to finish your analysis and then go off and do your design and development. So that analysis might come in the form of laying out the business objectives or the project charter and the audiences, the technical specifications, and the objectives. And then once that's set in stone, going off and doing some design and development. We would argue that actually if you do more design work before finishing your analysis, it will lead to additional analysis. And what we mean by that is that our process is defined down below there, or illustrated down below. And it's an iterative process. We call it Savvy. We have some books published on it. A similar process in the software space might be Agile. Essentially means you're building some rapid prototypes early in the process. And those prototypes are going to actually lead to additional questions you may ask yourselves or ask your stakeholders. So what we're suggesting is to make sure that you don't finalize your analysis and finalize your design through storyboards and sign off on all those phases, but rather iterate along the way. Now there's a time element and a cost element, obviously, to doing that. But doing some of that work up front is going to lead to additional analysis questions that's going to lead to a better design in the end. Another myth is that, and it actually probably still is taught in some of the schools, is that we need to list our learning objectives. And while we may want to do that, there may be instances where we need, well, there'll be many instances where we want to actually augment that. Most people, and we've seen it through the two-way glass, through focus groups, will not read the objectives. They're going to click the right arrow past that as quick as they can. So actually listing them is not going to be very fruitful. But if we're actually going to motivate our learners about the importance of what it is that we're teaching them, number one, to make them motivated, so when they leave their job they do it, but two, to make them motivated to be learning, there are other things that we can do. And so I'm going to actually launch a movie to show a different way to address motivation and showing the learner what the objectives are. Now the frame rate's going to come across a little choppy. I apologize for that, but you should get the gist of what's being accomplished here, and I'll give you the setup for it after. I'm having difficulties with my media player right now. So I'm going to explain what happened there. Essentially, we created a movie of a plane in the air, animated with audio and intensified music and audio going with it, that ultimately a flight attendant realizes that this pressure gauge on a slide does not work. And the plane ultimately goes down into the water. Now, the objective of this was to get flight attendants to actually follow the pre-flight check procedures properly. But we realized in that analysis that many of the learners were not motivated. They've been flying for 20 years, cut corners. There really hasn't been any consequences to their actions. And therefore, they don't pay too much attention to the pre-flight check procedures. And in fact, when a new learner comes on board, they might tell them to just ignore everything. Well, we know, and we've seen a plane go down, and this solution we had developed actually was done years before the plane went down in the Hudson, how important it can be to actually follow those. And so the movie up front subliminally actually gets at the objectives of why this is important, which is you're on that plane, things could happen, and you better be prepared for not only the people on the plane's sake, but for your own sake. So it might be followed by listing the objectives, but there should be a way we can motivate our learners beyond simple text on the screen. Another item that folks typically will address in their designs is the sequence, the content by skill, or a hierarchy. And what we mean by that is you might start with the easy stuff, maybe the base level knowledge, and build on that with additional content in presentation and knowledge checks. And the problem with that is you typically have multiple learners. Like teaching in a classroom, you may have people that are experienced and people that are fresh and new to the content. And we want to be able to address all those folks via an online solution. And if we start with the boring stuff, we're going to bore our experienced learners. By the time we get to anything exciting, they're going to be bored and tuned out. So it'll actually hide the helpful context, and it postpones any kind of meaningfulness. So to show an example of that, of where we didn't do that, I'm going to launch an example. And this is also going to be another good example of context, challenge, activity, feedback. Now this particular solution is training our responders and our police folks on potential terrorist attacks. So you see here there's a number of different modules, and I'm going to actually launch into one interaction in which we're actually having the learners respond. So I'm going to be patrolling a city street. And you see the context now. You're an officer. You've got to go through the city street. You're actually getting a 911 dispatch call.
Center Street, possible injuries. Repeat, 5th and Center Street.
As I click that, I'm now upon a scene. And up in the upper right-hand corner, I'm being timed. Time is of the essence. So our context is we're in the car, we're in the street, we have an accident. We don't know whether it's terrorist or not. Could be a bus accident. And now the activities for me are all on the left-hand side of the screen. These are the things I can do when I'm on my job. I can scan with binoculars, and as I do, I can see there's some children hurt on the ground. I can report to dispatch. I see a woman running out of the bus. I'm going to report that. I can move closer. I can request additional personnel. I see the bus is on fire, so I probably want to actually get the fire and EMTs there. I can move closer, and when I move, I can either move all the way up to the bus, or maybe I just move a little bit forward to assess the situation, which is the right thing to do. As I do, the chaos escalates, and in this case, I actually moved too close, and there was a secondary device under a car which blew up. So I need to actually restart that. So you need to complete these scenarios according to the best practice processes that are given through the feedback mechanisms.
No further details.
So we're not starting with pages and pages and pages describing the process. We're actually putting people into a challenge immediately and creating those activities by which they could solve the challenge. And through the feedback, they're going to actually get at learning some of that additional content. Now the new learners, so we're not actually putting them out as well. I'll show another example of that a little bit later. Oftentimes, folks want to provide immediate feedback. I mentioned my little click test earlier, that if I can click through things and try again, I might do that and just keep going. That I can do that when there's immediate feedback. You got it wrong, try again. Maybe it's a multiple choice question. I pick B, got it wrong, try again, I can go back and pick A. Well, that's going to actually detract from the context. It's going to make it too easy for the learners. And we believe that risk is a great motivator and that we shouldn't baby the learners. Many times learners are going to give feedback that it's too hard to get through a solution, and we need to pay attention to that. There's a fine line and a balance. But oftentimes what they're telling us is they want to be able to click the right arrow as quick as they can to get to the end. And if we're really looking at business impact, we probably shouldn't let them do that. For the sake of time, I'm going to actually skip by that particular interaction and get to another one here. Prevent learner errors, which is directly related to what I was just talking about. Let's not baby our learners. If we do, they're probably going to click, click, click to get through it as quick as they can. So let's launch a sales piece here, in which case we're training physicians on how to communicate with patients according to a best practice process, which is open and negotiate, then explore and assess, and transition and close. When we talk to Lucy, context is I'm a doctor, I've got a patient, here's my patient case study. My challenge is I now need to communicate with Lucy effectively, and with her we're talking about weight management, and my activities are how I would actually complete this challenge. So I can actually see what Lucy thinks, I can pick what it is that I want to say, but as I do that, although I am getting some immediate feedback, it's not in the form of you got it right, try again. It's allowing me to go down a branch. And it's allowing me to go down incorrect branches, because it's okay for people to learn what happens when they do things incorrectly. Ultimately, I can take a look at the full transcript, but I need to then, since I've gone down a wrong branch, redirect. I can get some insight into what Lucy's thinking by clicking, what are you thinking? So they're not always going to tell you what they're thinking. So we want that real-life practice. And ultimately, I could pick another path to try to redirect and get Lucy back on board. So back to what we were talking about here in the presentation, it's okay if learners actually can err, because they're going to learn what they shouldn't be doing on their job, and then they can actually evaluate and reassess and figure out what they should be doing and try that as well. Tell, then test. Oftentimes it's taught, I think, tell them what you're going to teach them, then tell them, and then tell them what you taught them, and maybe with some knowledge checks in there. We flip that model oftentimes, and we're going to actually test and then tell through the feedback. Now, we're not essentially given a test. We're actually given a learning interaction and a challenge. But when we do that, the learners aren't having to guess what's important to them. We actually are showing that context to the learner and what is important to them. And we give them ways to find information if they don't know what to do. So I've launched an interaction here in which we're going to teach the quality of time, cooking times as it relates to quality in the back of a house of a restaurant. So I'll skip the instructions and just explain this interaction. Essentially, it's a 4-level interaction. You see diamonds at the top of the screen. Restaurants are graded based on a diamond or different star ratings. And so we have 4 levels. The first level is a single ticket with a single food item on it. The second level would then graduate to a single ticket with multiple food items, and until the point where you get actually rapid fire tickets. Now, if I'm a new learner, I can actually go research and explore what all the cooking times of the foods are. So again, to address that skill hierarchy we talked about earlier, it's okay if we have a new learner presented with a challenge right away, as long as we give them resources to go actually learn and explore to help them solve those challenges. So this is kind of my studying, and now I need to actually practice. So I need to actually make this food item, and I've got a scaled clock here. The goal is to have quality food out within a 10-minute window. We have a scaled clock here. And I should put my thumbs down first, but I'm going to actually err here, and I'm going to cook my toast right away, which is going to cause a problem. And I'm going to cook my eggs right away, which is going to cause a problem. I'm going to throw my hash browns down. And you'll see my problem now is I'm gonna have cold toast, and if I leave my eggs on the grill, they're gonna burn. Or if I take them onto my plate, they're gonna be cold. I'll let them burn. They've now burned, turned to red. And my other food items here should cook. Throw my hash browns down. My bacon is done. Sausage is done, and my hash browns should be up here shortly, hopefully within one click. And if I sell this then, which means I'm putting it up on the counter, excuse me, I'm putting it up on the counter, I now have a problem because my quality I failed in, my time I was okay, so we're going to retry and we're going to get another random ticket. And it's pretty difficult to get through these 4 levels. By the time you're through, you're going to get a good idea of what the cooking times are for when you get to the back of the house and actually start cooking items. So we put the learner into the test right away. And through the feedback, they're going to get additional content and learn through trial and error. Well, we're running up against the clock a little bit. The screen's going to catch up. I'm waiting for the screen to catch up, but we want to talk about a few pitfalls to also look for from a process perspective. I don't have time to launch this particular movie, but it's a very funny movie. I suggest that you do if you haven't seen it. It's called Designing the Stop Sign video on YouTube. And what it ends up illustrating is perpetual revisions and stakeholders coming in late in the game and things like that I'm going to address here in the next few slides before we get to questions. So it looks at a process of designing the stop sign and how it takes forever and ever and ever, and what the end solution is not really what it was intended to be or solve, the business problem solve. So if you've ever been on a project where there's no end in sight, the cost and time keep increasing, it's a perpetual bleed, these are some things to look out for. So we talked about process earlier. If your stakeholders enter the quality assurance process late, that's going to pose big problems. So in our process, that would be if a stakeholder actually comes into that blue area of the band in the illustration. After we've gotten through the we've done prototypes and iterations and revised our design to come up with something that we're going to go build. If we go build it and then the stakeholders come in, that's going to cause a big problem. And so a way to actually minimize that risk is set up expectation documents. Make sure that your stakeholders are in the initial meetings and the early reviews, and almost demand that, because most often if they're not, they're going to come and make changes late, and those changes can get quite costly. Last review comments. We've seen some forums out, people looking for different review trackers for different tool sets out there. And if in your process you have experienced either lost review comments or for folks are saying, well, we suggested where is that change? Sometimes that can be a true process. And persistent, we have a professional called QA. There's one that Rapid Intake has. It's called Review that can be hooked into different tools. And the importance here is the bug tracker systems are more valuable if you can actually tie them into the existing courseware you have versus have them sit outside. And what I mean by that is if a reviewer is reviewing something, they can actually click a button within the course and it pops up a window similar to what you see in the lower right where they can make comments, and that then will tell your developers where that comment needs to be addressed. Within the bug tracking and QA part of the process, if there's multiple reviewers and nobody has authority, that can pose a problem. If you've ever been on a project where revisions are made over and over and over again, maybe somebody says paint the door orange, another person says paint the door green, somebody comes back later and says paint the door orange, and you've made all those changes, well, that can add up and be quite costly. and it could detract from your overall design mode. So if you can actually create somebody with authority that actually has the ability to come in and synthesize all those comments, that can be very helpful. We've also found it helpful that if you can get everybody together in a room, maybe at the alpha or beta stage, and just hammer through the changes, that can be quite useful as well, versus having 12 reviewers out on their own time funneling feedback into a review person that's actually got the authority to make that synthesis. This is similar related if you're going through too many revision cycles. A way to minimize that risk is to have sign-offs, require those sign-offs to actually happen. Set your expectations up front with the people that are reviewing about what can be changed at a stage and when it can be changed. And again, I talked about the bug tracker system. And then 3 last things as it relates to our CCAF model. If you find yourself in that information awareness band level and maybe think you shouldn't be, so it's not aligning with what the business drivers are, there are some things to take a look at that can actually help. We've given you a model today to look at. And that, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes it does mean more cost, sometimes it doesn't. So if you can build repurposable models, many of the things I showed in this presentation were repurposable and can be reused. Therefore, our costs are not always high in the skill building area. But take a look at some of the feedback you get and buffer it. So what I mean by that is if you have stakeholders or learner feedback that comes in and says the course is too difficult, be careful to adhere completely 100% to that. It is important to listen, and there is a balance. You don't want to frustrate your learners. We get that. But if what they're telling you is that they just want to click through and get through it as quick as possible so they can go on to do other stuff, what they're really saying is they don't want to learn, and what you're going to end up creating is not going to provide business impact or impact for the business. So a way to minimize that is you should do learner testing, but as you do user testing, take a look at that feedback for usability and not 100% determination of what your learning strategy should be. That should fall within your learning team and within the stakeholder discussions you have. And I think this butts us up right to the end of our time together today. I wanted to have enough time for questions, so we will for sure stick around. There's some additional resources available to you on our website. Many of them are for free. So there's a white paper on CCAF. We have some books published. And while I bring up those slides, I will have Carrie and Britt maybe direct me to some different questions that have come up. So one of the questions is, can you give me an example of teaching a soft skill like coaching or customer service? And we do have some examples, so I would ask folks to reach out to me. I can show other demos if you want to have one-on-one. I'm going to describe one here today, which is for training customer service, there's many things that go in procedural into. There's actually how I'm actually addressing our customers. There's probably a product knowledge level of that. There's also some listening skills. There's also conversational and maybe best practice skills on how you deal with conflict. And we've done a lot of that, and what we would recommend is you, again, look at what is it the learner needs to do and building the interactivity such that they have to do that. So for, let's say I'm a service rep and I'm working for a telecom company. And I have to deal with people that are calling with actually in. And you have to have a conversation either by selecting things to say or by speaking literally into the computer. And you have to do the other things you would need to do on your job. So maybe you have to assess things. Maybe you have to click into the customer database and assess whether that person has a hold on the account. Well, what that is, for some parts of that are actually being about. In that same question, there was a question about soft skills. And that leadership, issues, or performance reviews and appraisals. And again, those things, there should be a great learner a way to have actually practice it. And it may be a single event, as I mentioned earlier, probably needs to happen if it's really critical. Maybe where the interactivity they go through within a course. Then they come back to a classroom and get together and have small focus groups together to discuss the different branches and decisions they made within that course. Yes. Task-oriented training, the example training, more oriented to sales environments. I think I just addressed that with the service. But again, for sales, we would get to having them practice positioning products for actually practicing the sales situation. It is important what they need to know, the product features and benefits, but it's more important how they actually position those products and features and identify needs to actually market those solutions to. So we would actually create contextual scenarios where they practice that. Can this be, one of the questions is, can be built in mobile-friendly formats, i.e. not Flash? The answer to that is yes. Really, regardless of the tool sets, in our survey we're asking everybody if they could stick around to answer what tools they may be using. But regardless of all the tools, although there are limitations and technology considerations, these models, or parts of these models, can be implemented. So even if you were using the PowerPoint, context, challenge, activity, and feedback can be implemented as you're designing your content. And to address that further, yes, mobile, we can bring that into and deploy via native iOS or different devices. You do have design considerations that you're going everywhere, obviously, because if you're going to the phones, you have screen real estate versus the tablets versus the desktop. So there's a technology consideration and a design consideration, but it is all possible. There may be some other ones that we're missing. I surely can go back. I'm going to get to the screen that has my email address that you could email me directly. So I mentioned we have books and white papers on our website. But if you do have questions as it relates to this or any projects you're working on, I'll be glad to talk to you about them. It's no cost to you. Be happy to provide help where we can provide help. And for questions I did not get to, surely email me and I'll follow up. I think we've reached, we're a little bit over time. I appreciate it if folks have stayed on. We're going to actually launch a survey for you if you can hang on for another minute or two. But I do really appreciate your time today, and I thank you for your patience for the couple times that